Hi, this is Jim from Vaudevisuals. I'm here talking to Jay Gilligan, who's currently in Sweden and a juggler extraordinaire. He's coming to New York to do a show sometime very soon, and we'll talk about that in a second. Jay's been performing as a juggler and loving it for 35 years, which is amazing. That's a great amount of time to be working in the same profession and loving it. That's really terrific. It's very admirable. I really think that's great. So tell us about your juggling techniques. I mean, do you work in all different aspects of juggling, clubs, hoops, rings, and all the different things?
Yeah, I mean that's such a great question because, like you said, I've been juggling for 35 years, and I noticed a few things. Like I've been kind of looking backwards towards the past during the pandemic. It's given us all some time, whether we wanted it or not, to do different things with that time. And of course, one of the things was to reflect back to the beginning of what am I doing here. And I remember when I was growing up, I learned to juggle in the, like we could say 1985 is an easy number to name. And in 1985, I remember people kind of did props, right? Like they would be like, "Oh, today I juggled," and you say, "Oh, that's cool. What did you practice?" And they would say, "Well, I practiced balls, I practiced rings, and then I juggled some plungers." It's like you would name the object that you juggled, and then I was remembering that kind of after a few years went by, people started to do they would kind of practice tricks instead of props because the trick you could do with different props. So then, oh hey, I had a really good practice today. And then what did you practice? Well, I practiced, under the leg and behind the back. I did some behind the backs with clubs and then some with balls, and like you could kind of transfer the tricks from one prop to another. So that was kind of fun. And then after a while, people started to do like sequences and not just tricks, but just like longer, stringing tricks together where you would have transitions in between the tricks. And then
Nice.
I kind of have this fun fantasy that maybe in the future, these transitions, they're kind of like these little weird throws that aren't maybe tricks on their own, that nobody would kind of do on their own if they were just doing tricks. But they would do it because they're sequencing from one trick to the next, the transitioning.
Gotcha.
And I have this little joke in my mind that maybe in the future of juggling is just all transitions. Like you kind of
Uh,
you start like what's the next evolution? You get rid of the tricks themselves, and you just do these little in between bits or something.
oh,
Um, but yeah, I definitely do lots of different like props, and that's kind of been one of the main things in my main kind of evolution of my work was that this realization that when I grew up there was balls and rings and clubs, and that was wonderful. It's still wonderful. But then a few years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I just started thinking like, man, think about all the variations you could have on different shapes. And if you were a painter, it's like you would just have, red, blue, and, one shade of red, one shade of blue, one shade of yellow.
right.
And as a painter, that would just be ridiculous, right? You would just be like, why don't you just mix some new paints? Like, and so as a juggler, I really started to play with different material. And I can say one thing, maybe to sum all this up. I don't know if this makes any sense to you, but
Sure
uh,
does.
but now I'm making this new show. I'm gonna come to New York, which is why I have such a great opportunity to talk to you now. Like it's so amazing to be able to talk to you because you've been such an inspiration to my work over all these years and just your involvement in the community. And I got to meet you in New York City, like how long ago was that? 15 years ago or something. And I'll never forget it at Dixon's Place there. And so yeah, anyway, so I'm doing this show in New York, which is why I get to talk to you. And when I was setting up the show, I was going to the theater where I'm rehearsing here in Stockholm to do the final preparations, and I was carrying a big box fan with me, like a fan, because in the show I have a couple of tricks where I blow things around in the air while I juggle them.
Nice.
And I was just like, man, I'm so happy after 35 years I finally get to carry around a fan. It kind of seems fundamental as a juggler who's you're working with objects and the environment, the air, and normally you don't want the air to be moving around, but why shouldn't we investigate that kind of situation as well? So I kind of felt like I had arrived somehow, that I'm carrying around this fan finally, which is a little bit symbolic of my journey maybe. So I was really proud.
Very metaphorical, actually. Very metaphorical
Yeah, I got a
because
fan now, so finally. But But I just remember, I was just thinking, like, imagine I'm 8 years old, and when I learned to juggle three balls, and if somebody would have taught me the cascade with three balls, right, the first pattern, and then given me a fan and been like, now do something with this, like, it would have just, of course, changed my whole life.
Right. Well, you
Just kind of
discovered the
found it
fan
too.
later on in your life, which is fine.
Yeah, it's just kind of funny how things
I mean,
go.
you're kind of like doing like R&D in your juggling world. I mean, you're taking on the idea of thinking outside the box, as you might say, in terms of the juggling conventions that most people are familiar with. You're like taking it to a different place, which is really quite admirable.
Yeah, I mean, like, I love the culture I grew up in, which is the hobbyist juggling culture. It's so inspiring and so rich, and there's so many inspiring people in that culture. But then there is this weird transition that a lot of us go through. I'd say most of us do, when you start off as a hobbyist, and then you transition into the professional, world as a professional performer, and you have this new set of values. Like, it's the old trope of, like, well, the audience can't tell if you're doing 5 or 6 rings, right? Like, just take the money and run, or whatever. I mean, on that side of it, of the spectrum, right? And then on the other side of it, of course, the hobbyists, like, they just live and die for the passion of, like, I did 18 catches of 6 rings, and tomorrow I'm going to do 19 catches. Like, it's on a different level that you view the tricks.
Yeah, I
And
mean, because
so,
the number game with the juggling doesn't really impress me that much. I mean, I know that a lot of people are actually after that kind of determination. I want to get six. I want to get seven. I want to get eight. But I always thought like the only way that I would really enjoy a juggler would be if they had some kind of character or they had some kind of unique aspect to them. I mean, like there's one famous saying that the only time I enjoy watching a juggler is when they drop because then you really see the character come through on how he recovers
right.
from that drop, right? And that's quite
And,
interesting.
and that's going to happen. So,
Right, right.
but I have to ask you, because you're a mime, right? Like,
I was a mime, yeah.
yeah. And so you remember Tony Montanaro, of
Oh,
course.
Tony, of course.
And so Tony used to have this saying. I don't know if you ever heard it. I'm so curious. Maybe he told you. He would always say to me, Jay, if I was a juggler, I want to do, whatever, 6 or 7 clubs. I would start with one ball, and I would throw the ball perfectly. Like, he would always say that. Like, he would just take the one ball and do everything you could do with one ball perfectly. And that really stuck in my mind. I heard, he told me that when I was like 16 years old. And
Wow, wow.
that really made a big impact on me, to have this guy come to me, and I was trying to do the numbers thing, right? And then Tony's like, I would do one ball perfectly. And I was like, what? And that totally changed my perspective.
It's a brilliant insight, actually. It really is quite a brilliant insight. Tony was phenomenal. Yeah, he was a blessing to the mime community. For the time that he spent with us. Which is really quite a long time, which was nice. We were happy. So tell
Yeah,
us, when you come to New York, you're doing a show in a venue here in New York. Now, what's the name of the venue you're performing in?
yeah. So the show's called Reflex. Is the title of the show, Reflex, and the venue is called the Theater, MiTu580. It's MiTu580. It's in Brooklyn, and we actually opened previews January 28th, and I think the official premiere is February 1st, and we're going to go towards um, the first 3 weeks of February. I think February 19th or 20th is the last show.
Wow.
And yeah, so we're going to do a few weeks, and I'm going to do a bunch of shows every day. So I think we're doing like 4 weeks of shows or something. In the last week of shows, we're going to live stream some. I think the venue that we're in, as far as I know, they have a whole live streaming setup because of the whole Corona thing the past couple of years. So they have like a nice little state of the art camera system.
Nice.
So at first we were really like, I don't know if we want to do this live streaming thing, because of course it's so, like everything, it's so easy to do badly. But then they had this really nice setup, so we thought, okay, let's give it a shot, and we have a few ideas about how maybe we can make it nice for people to watch online. So I
Nice.
think it's going to be good. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
excited.
That sounds very good. That sounds so reflex. And
Yeah, that's the title.
I'm
And
so
you were talking about the number, this numbers game of like one more, one more. And in the show, I actually tell a little story. But I think you might enjoy this. I worked in Las Vegas for many times in my life, and
right.
when I was a teenager, I was working there. And I went down the street to see Anthony Gatto, who was performing with Melinda, the First Lady of Magic. And of course, we all the jugglers know that Anthony Gatto, probably the greatest juggler ever in the world. And he had done his act, of course, just flawlessly. I mean, it's like a 9-minute act with just all the craziest tricks you've never seen anybody do. And I was a teenager, and I was just, I just I didn't have any words. I still don't have any words. Like I can't talk about it. And so after the show, he's outside the theater and he's signing autographs for the people, the audience as they walk out. And we're all in a line, and I'm next in line, but in front of me is like a 10-year-old boy. And so I gotta wait for this boy, and I'm a little bit impatient because I'm just dying to meet Anthony, and he just blew my mind, right, and changed my life. But this little kid's in front of me, and the kid, I'll never forget this. The kid says to Anthony, "Oh, hey, how many rings were you juggling? How many rings did you do?" And not the nicest kid, but kind of poking at Anthony, and Anthony is just the nicest guy you've ever met, right? And he was like so gracious, and he said, "Oh, at the end of the show, I do 9 rings. At the end of the act, I do 9 rings. And thank you so much for coming today. It's so nice to see you. Like, really appreciate that you came out and said hi." Like, he was just so nice. And then the kid just looks at Anthony and goes, "You did 9 rings? My dad can do 10." And then and the kid runs away. It's just like, that's just the numbers game. Like if you're only gonna work on that game of numbers, right? Like, you just get a 10-year-old kid coming and even if you do 9 rings on stage, the kid just goes, "My dad does 10," and then
10.
kind of done, right? Like,
what are you gonna say about that, right? What can you say to that? Yeah.
Cool. And maybe his dad was, whoever, Sergei Ignatov.
Right. I have a funny story about Vegas. I was in Vegas doing a trade show, and the company that I was with, there was like 3 or 4 performers, and when I was doing mine back in the day, and we wanted to go see a show on the Strip. So we saw that Anthony Gatto was performing that night. The show was the sinking of the Titanic, which they actually did on stage.
Yeah.
It was like millions of gallons of water, right? Anyway, so we got to the stage, we got to the theater, and then they made an announcement that Anthony Gatto was not going to be performing that night, but in his place was going to be George Carl. And that was such a delight. That was such a delight. I was so tickled to hear that, because I prefer George juggling any day. But
that's pretty hilarious. Yeah, like you're just like, "Oh man, Anthony's not here. They got some replacement. Like, that's not going to be."
Exactly. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. Anyway, we look forward to your show. It sounds awesome. Reflex, that's terrific. And you're going to be doing a lot of different kinds of amazing things in the show, I'm sure. We're using out of the ordinary juggling phenomena that you're talking about,
Yeah, the end of the show, actually, the finale of the show is I have these special balls that I developed with an artist here in Stockholm. He used to run the circus school. He's about 80 years old. And when he was 70 years old, he picked up a new hobby, which was embroidery. So he's doing embroidery on like large scale pictures.
Oh, wow.
And we went into work together because he really likes juggling. So we're like, "Oh, how can we have this collaboration between embroidery and juggling? That's pretty obscure." Like, and we developed these balls that basically you construct them from nothing. So you kind of wrap layers of ribbon and feathers and beads and confetti and cloth and different surprises. And you wind like a huge ball, and you make 3 of them, and then as you juggle them, they fall apart in the air. It looks like fireworks. So we're gonna do that at the end of the show, and it's kind of crazy. Each ball, it takes about an hour to wind up the whole mess and get the whole contraption working. It's because it's a lot of mechanics inside of like these slingshot balloons, kind of slingshot, like rubber bands slingshot out, and
cool
things. So it's gonna be like a pretty fun ending with, and then at the end the balls just go to nothing. They just go to a handful of confetti because they just get
Is that where the fan comes in?
No, before that, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, at least after the show to move the mess for the next show. We're gonna do that. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Jay. Thank you for your time. It's really great to talk to you. And the internet is amazing that we can actually spend time. I'm in New York, you're in Sweden, and we can chat and talk about your work and your show coming up.
Man, thanks for taking the time to talk to me. It's sincerely an honor to talk to you again. Yeah, man, I can't express it.
It's a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to seeing your show numerous times, actually.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would love to buy you lunch one day and hear about anything you would have to say about mime and working in New York and performing with more great stories about George Carl.
Oh, yeah, George came to my studio once, and I did some beautiful photographs of him. Yeah.
Okay. I got to hear about that.
He was a funny guy. Well, you take care of yourself, huh? Travel
Great.
safely, and we'll talk to you soon. All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Take care.
Bye.